International rosters are everywhere in Counter-Strike right now. We've got 33-year-olds facing off against 17-year-olds, and a roster with an average age under 20 comfortably made top 8 at Copenhagen. The team names might seem familiar, but increasingly a new generation is stepping up to the plate in this beautiful game. So now that Copenhagen is in the rearview mirror, I think it's fair to ask, are we living in a new era of Counter-Strike? Alright guys, before we get into the video, just a quick reminder that if you enjoy yourself today, we'd love to get your like on the video. And if you haven't already, why not subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of our content when it becomes available. Cheers. I mentioned a few things in the intro there, but why don't we start with international rosters? So for the purposes of this video, we are calling Na'Vi and Vitality international. After all, there's not a majority of any one country, and they have to call in a different language to accommodate everybody. Now, what's clear is that as regions continue to develop and expand their own development pipelines for the game, the chance to fit into a top roster immediately is an attractive opportunity to rising stars. So if we use a simple 3 out of 5 rule, 4 of the current top 5 teams are international. Only Spirit, majority Russian, are the exception. Things start to look better for national teams if you zoom out to top 10 where it's 50-50. But maybe this is an even bigger argument for international teams. After all, they seem overrepresented at the top, but they certainly aren't overrepresented in the general population of Counter-Strike teams. And sure, this is only a snapshot and it could change. But these teams are doing well, and the ability to absorb a hot new prospect at a moment's notice seems to be an advantage that these international teams will continue to utilize going forward. And speaking of development pipelines, they're a big reason why you're seeing this flood of young, hungry players just breaking their way into Tier 1. The fact is that over the past half-decade, development rosters have become one of the biggest success stories in Counter-Strike. Now, in a certain sense, orgs have been kind of half-heartedly talking about development rosters for a long time. Part of that is probably that you've seen this same model used in other sports, and there isn't an obvious reason why that model wouldn't work in Counter-Strike. So what's changed recently? Well, for one thing, there's an actual challenger level scene for these teams to compete in. And then there's smaller tournaments that many of these teams go to cut their teeth against some of the biggest orgs. So today, players not only enter into this system with deeper potential, but they begin to realize it much more quickly than before. They have these orgs spending money trying to find them, but then also to actually develop them once they're signed to one of these rosters. Now, MOUZ is a perfect example of this. They started their development team MOUZ Next in 2021, and since then, they've been a constant force in the challenger level scene, sometimes even surpassing the main roster during the org's darkest moments. After some roster moves, some of which they probably got paid for, MOUZ is back to having 4 members that were previously on MOUZ Next. And Team Spirit, another hot name right now, has been similarly active with their academy roster. They've even taken flack from fans who believe that they find these players quickly, but then simply drop the bag. Mir, SDY, and Wonderful all passed through the Spirit organization at some point. To that point, Wonderful just won his first major, and his teammate Bit is a product of Na'Vi's own, much older Na'Vi Junior development program. MOUZ and Spirit both had this weird moment where it wasn't clear which roster was really on top, and at that point they quickly made changes. Despite also signing m0NESY, Na'Vi Junior never really had that moment, although for much of the development roster's peak, Na'Vi was ranked top 3, and the answer to why that happened is simple. Now, I mentioned coaching earlier as a thing that really is helping to create this new era of Counter-Strike, and both MOUZ and Spirit have invested in coaching as part of this strategy. Spirit's current head coach Hallie spent several months as coach of the academy roster, and then months more as assistant coach on the main Spirit roster before getting the head coach gig. And current MOUZ coach Cyclone was also promoted from his position as academy coach back in 2022. But the last thing I want to talk about is that we've got plenty of older players who are stretching their their careers into their 30s, and it also seems like that's something that will become more common too. Now, it almost seems cliche to talk about the whole mental and physical conditioning angle, but obviously this does play some role. And those kinds of things, ergonomics, player conditioning, are likely to only improve with time. Ultimately, it's still early days in a sense. Now, FaZe Clan's Kerrigan has put together an incredible career where, like many competitors, he had to reinvent himself. But the 33-year-old IGL, who started as a fragging prodigy, can absolutely turn back the clock.
Captain versus captain to start off. Map 3, it's Kerrigan to take it!
Kerrigan almost won the whole damn thing at Copenhagen, and if he had, he would have broken his own personal record for the oldest player to win a major. Also, his teammate Rain is turning 30 this August, and that makes me feel incredibly old. The other teams in the current top 8 boast veterans themselves. For example, Vitality's Apex is 31, and as far as I can tell, it looks like he's got plenty left to give. Turkish roster Eternal Fire made top 8, and they had 33-year-old Major playing next to 19-year-old Wicadia. Now, I didn't talk a lot about Na'Vi here because, well, they won. We've talked about them in previous videos, but I do want to hone in on one thing. They may not have an old timer in the server, but their coach Blade is a veteran of the game, and he has more than enough experience for an entire roster. Outside the top 8, there's plenty of older players as well. I didn't talk about Denmark or Brazil, but there's one player specifically I want to hone in on. Nine Pandas rifler Glowing qualified for his first major at 30, although the team was sadly kept out of Copenhagen by travel issues.
Anything else is Wrinkle in the late round. Glowing gets one, a second is one to the low HP. Somehow a third headshot managed. Needs to get out of the way of the last player. How has he managed? A 1v4, he has to get under the bomb. Wrinkle's got no other choice. A volley, a smoke, but neither can be deployed.
Glowing had played on teams in the Siberian city of Krasnoyarsk, but he didn't start playing in matches of note until he was 24. And in a recent interview with HLTV, which honestly was kind of heartwarming, he credits hard work for letting him get to this point at age 30. Ultimately, when you look at these rosters, most of them are based on a mix of youth and experience, and that seems like a formula that should work going forward. Still, despite the importance that some of us place on youth, the exception really would be a uniformly young team like MOUZ taking the major. I don't think it's impossible, even if Dimitri thought it was extremely implausible. What are you guys doing with your pick'ems? But at the end of the day, it isn't what happens all the time. It really would be the exception. But with young players hitting tier 1 more prepared than ever, and with all these resources put into developing them and coaching them, it definitely seems like it could be plausible at some point. Counter-Strike has continued to evolve, and this most recent major was just a reminder of how far the game has come, even just since the beginning of CSGO. I think it's kind of important to stop and take a moment to take stock. Really smell the roses, you know? What do you guys think? Will we see even more development teams? Could Kerrigan go another decade? Do you really think that a team as young as MOUZ could now really win a major? Let me know down in the comments below. I'll see you next time. Any Helldivers in the comments? My friend 3D printed this stratagem for me. There you go. See, now I can call down the 500 at any time. It's a pretty crisp print. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen like the way 3D prints used to look, but they look gross. This one's pretty clean, I gotta say. So let's go Na'Vi.